from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
Something had to be done. As the war with Iran enters its fourth day, President Trump doubling down on his justification for the strikes while meeting with Germany's chancellor, lashing out at allies who won't let the U.S. use their air bases. We'll have more with Republican Senator Mike Rounds and be joined by Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danon, this hour.
And traders eye energy, oil and gas climb again as markets digest the fallout from the Iran conflict. The president announcing today the U.S. will protect and insure tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Traders warning Bloomberg the longer this lasts, the bigger the risk, even as the White House tries to play down fears of an energy shock.
If we have a little high oil prices for a little while, but as soon as this ends, those prices are going to drop, I believe, lower than even before.
And the battle for Congress, it's primary day in North Carolina, Arkansas, and Texas, where the hotly contested Republican and Democratic Senate contest could be the first big tests of the 2026 midterms. Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine joins us later this hour.
Well, we begin this evening with breaking news from Capitol Hill, where House lawmakers are huddling behind closed doors now, receiving a briefing from top Trump administration officials on the continued conflict in Iran as the war now in its fourth day widens. Secretary of State Marco Rubio backtracking on the rationale for the conflict as he went in to brief lawmakers a short time ago. Listen.
Did we go in because of Israel? And I said, you were asking me that follow-up, and I said, no. I told you this had to happen anyway. I was very clear in that answer. This was a question of timing, of why this had to happen as a joint operation, not the question of the intent. Once the president made a decision that negotiations were not going to work, that they were playing us on the negotiations, and that this was a threat that was untenable, the decision was made to strike them.
Let's get now to Bloomberg's Myles Miller, who is live on Capitol Hill, where Rubio and other top administration officials are briefing lawmakers. So, Myles, the secretary phrasing things a little differently today than yesterday. What else have we learned?
Yeah, hearing senators come out of their classified briefing, I mean, it was very clear that this is going to fall on partisan lines. With Republicans controlling both the House and the Senate here, it became very clear that Republicans are going to hold the party line and will not restrict the president's powers as it relates to doing anything he needs to do in Iran. One thing that was interesting that he heard from Senator Rick Scott of Florida was that you should not rule out boots on the ground, and that is something that the president should have at his disposal. You can see behind me that there are a number of members of the House of Representatives who are about to file into the auditorium here at the Capitol Visitor Center to get their briefing, their full briefing on what happened over the weekend and what the plan is going forward. But yes, as you said, these votes are expected this week in both chambers on war powers, and these are resolutions, of course, that would require the president to halt military action, but that seems very unlikely hearing folks come out of that initial briefing that happened at 4 this afternoon. What was also interesting is to hear Senator Fetterman of Pennsylvania break from Democrats and talk about what he learned in that hearing and how that leads him to support the president in his push to push out the regime in Iran.
It's good to have you up there for us, Myles Miller. Thank you so much. Live from Capitol Hill as we turn to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue now, where President Trump took questions from reporters today for the first time since the U.S. launched the Iran strikes. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall was in the Oval Office as Trump met with the German chancellor, and she joins us now from the White House North Lawn. Tyler, the president took questions, I should say, on a range of issues, including this evolving justification. He said it was his opinion that the Iranians were about to strike. What else can you tell us?
Well, Joe, President Trump also told us reporters in the Oval Office that the potential worst-case scenario would be if new leadership in Iran emerged, quote, just as bad as the regime the U.S. and Israel are trying to change. President Trump reiterated he would like to see a new, more moderate leader emerge who the U.S. feels that it can work with, though, as you well know, the president has also called on the Iranian people to take over their government. Now, President Trump was meeting with the German chancellor inside the Oval Office, who broadly agreed with President Trump, at least publicly, on the stated goals of the mission, in particular around the need for new leadership in Iran. However, he did caution and bring up concerns about what a potentially prolonged conflict could mean for the global economy.
This is, of course, damaging our economies. This is true for the oil prices, and this is true for the gas prices as well. So that's the reason why we all hope that this war will come to an end as soon as possible. And we are hoping that the Israeli and the American army are doing the right things to bring this to an end and to have really a new government in place who is coming back to peace and freedom.
Yeah. Something had to be done. And it's been 47 years.
The German chancellor said that he was here today at the White House to talk about the, quote, next day. What happens next as the U.S. maintains that it will sustain this military operation until all of its objectives are achieved? Joe and Kaylee, on the operational front, the conflict looks headed into its 5th day, as President Trump posted on Truth Social earlier today, maintaining that the U.S. has enough stockpiles to keep the military operation going unabated.
And of course, that's not the only post we got from the president on Truth Social today. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, thank you so much. The president also promising via his social media platform to escort and ensure tankers in the Strait of Hormuz in order to allow safe passage of energy flows out of the Middle East. That took some of the risk premium in energy markets out today after massive surges in natural gas and oil prices. So we'll turn now to power moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who is joining us live from World Headquarters in New York. Romaine, is this promise from the president enough to reassure these markets?
Well, it was for a brief period of time. We should point out Brent crude futures at one point earlier in the session were up about 9%, around the time that we started to get those headlines about President Trump's post on Truth Social that he would, maybe provide some form of insurance for these vehicles going in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, as well as potentially naval escorts. We actually saw crude prices basically pare back almost all of its gains. At one point, it looked like they were actually going to dip into the red. But as we got deeper into the day, Kaylee, we started to get more headlines about unconfirmed reports of drone strikes by Iran, maybe potential missile strikes by Israel. The idea here that this, whatever's going on in the Middle East, is certainly not over, and that the damage that it could potentially do could drag on for quite some time. There's also been reports from Iranian state TV about them asserting or saying that they still have control over the Strait of Hormuz. So the net effect of it is what you see on your screen there. We are still about 5% higher or so on Brent crude and WTI crude from where we were the previous session here. So the impact that those headlines out of Trump did have were certainly temporary, and that is going to be the big narrative going forward for really all of the assets in financial markets as they await not so much whatever the next headline is, but some sort of confirmation of a resolution, maybe potentially a resolution that people want to see sooner rather than later.
Some important earnings after the bell. Romaine, CrowdStrike out with its latest quarterly results, and I'm just curious how this is playing and what they're saying, because this, along with other cyber stocks, got pulled down in the whole SaaS-pocalypse last couple of weeks. What are we learning? Yeah, well, they've been oscillating between gains and losses all day long. Here's the problem is they pretty much came in, their results came in pretty much in line with estimates. Their forecast also came in line with estimates. But as you said, the narrative, and that's the narrative that's on the conference call right now, is about those concerns about the disruption from AI, whether a lot of the services that these companies have been offering can, quite frankly, be replicated by new AI tools coming out of Anthropic, OpenAI, and others, presumably AI tools that can actually be deployed at a fraction of the cost that CrowdStrike and others have actually been charging. Great. Romaine, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick with us live from New York. The president today maintains that the U.S. had no choice but to attack Iran first. Here's what he told reporters.
We were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. They were going to attack. If we didn't do it, they were going to attack first. I felt strongly about that. And we have great negotiators, great people, people that do this very successfully and have done it all their lives very successful. And based on the way the negotiation was going, I think they were going to attack first. And I didn't want that to happen. So if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand.
Joining us now for more, Danon, Israeli ambassador to the UN. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to Bloomberg TV. and radio. I'm curious your thoughts about what the president just said there. The question that he was asked was, did Israel force your hand? You heard his response. He said, if anything, I might have forced Israel's. Which one is true?
Well, I don't think anyone can force President Trump's hand. We know him very well. He's a leader. He takes his own decisions. And I think we have no daylight between Israel and the U.S. regarding Iran. We believe the threats from Iran. When they say they want to destroy the U.S. and Israel, we took it seriously. And we saw their capabilities with the ballistic missiles. And we didn't wait for the point where it was too late. You know, the minute they actually had the capability to build a nuclear warhead and to assemble it on the ballistic missiles that they have already, it would have been too late. That's why the president took the right decision not to wait. And I think history will judge it as one of the most important decisions for the American people, not for the Israelis or the Europeans. He protected the American interests.
The Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters yesterday that the U.S. believed that Israel was about to strike first. Therefore, we decided to go ahead with our own operation. Is that true that Israel was set to strike Iran in the past couple of days?
Well, I will not go into details, but I will tell you that our position was always, also during the JCPOA, that we will do whatever is necessary in order to prevent Iran from achieving a nuclear bomb. You know, we learn from history. When they say they want to destroy us, we believe them. And that's why we are monitoring the situation. I want to remind you, Joe, we attacked Iran 9 months ago. And we hope that that will be enough, that they will recalculate their position. They will start to negotiate some kind of an agreement. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. They doubled down. They started to invest more funds on the nuclear sites, on the proxies, on the ballistic missiles. And if I may, I want to say one point about the ballistic missiles. Today, when we see the attacks, you know, the lunatic attack, like the president calls them, against the UAE, against Bahrain, against Saudis, we realize that, you know, those guys, you cannot trust them with any weapon.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, obviously it was an Israeli strike that ended up taking out the supreme leader as well as many other members or high in the leadership in Iran's structure here. The president also said today that when it comes to who is going to fill this leadership vacuum, that the choices that the U.S. at least had in mind also have been killed, at least some of the top choices. Does Israel now have someone in mind? What would Israel like to see happen next?
No, first we are focused on degrading the capabilities, making sure there is no threat to Israel, to the region, to the world. And in the long run, you know, we believe that there will be a new leadership. That will be the responsibility for the Iranian people to choose. But we will create the conditions for them to actually take control of their future. For 47 years, they were oppressed. The regime tortured the people, used the funds to subsidize terrorists in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, no investments in the people of Iran. So I think once we will create those conditions, the Iranian people will have to step up and actually choose their own leadership.
Ambassador, the president was asked today about worst-case scenarios, and he reached, in fact, for what might come next. I'd like you to listen to what he said and have you respond. Here's the president from earlier.
I guess the worst case would be we do this and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen. We don't want that to happen. That would probably be the worst. You go through this and then in 5 years you realize you put somebody in who was no better. So we'd like to see somebody in there that's going to bring it back for the people. And we'll see what happens with the people. You know, they have their chance. We've said don't do it yet. If you're going to go out and protest, don't do it yet. It's very dangerous out there. A lot of bombs are being dropped. But I would say that would be about the worst.
Do you have someone in mind right now? Because you said all the people you did have in mind have been taken out.
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead.
Ambassador Danon, would Israel allow someone, as the president put it, who is as bad as the Ayatollah to take power in Iran?
Well, first, we think it cannot get worse than it was. And, you know, we had a similar discussion about Syria. For years, people said, you know, it's better to deal with the devil you know. Let's keep Assad in power because who knows who will come after him. And we proved it was wrong. Once Assad was out, you have a new regime in Syria, and hopefully there will be better future for the Syrians. Same with Iran. I think it's going to be only better than what we have today. This regime is a dangerous one, and I think we cannot name who will be in charge, but we are positive and we are sure that it will be better than the Ayatollah, who for generations spread chaos, terror in Iran, in the Middle East, and in the entire world.
Mr. Ambassador, President Trump announced today that he is ordering the U.S. Development Finance Corporation to provide insurance for tankers that would be trying to transit the Strait of Hormuz. He also said, if necessary, the U.S. Navy will begin escorting tankers. Is that an effort that Israeli forces are willing and prepared to partake in, or will the U.S. have to be providing that assurance alone?
So, I have been in diplomacy for many years, and the level of coordination between Israel and the U.S., it's beyond imagination. And I'm sure we will take part in whatever the U.S. will find that we can actually have the added value. But, I would say that to the Iranians. They're making so many mistakes, at attacking the countries in the Gulf. They thought that it will put pressure, and those countries will actually pressure the U.S. and Israel to stop the war. And what happened in the last few days, it's on the contrary. Those countries are actually now demand that the war will continue and this regime will not stay in power. And same with the Strait of Hormuz. If they will try to affect global economy, they will see more countries actually joining the fight against this radical regime.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, we so appreciate you joining us and would like to stay in touch as this conflict is expected to continue for some time. Danon, Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, thank you so much. And up next, we'll get the view from the Gulf as this conflict with Iran escalates. Kenneth Pollack of the Middle East Institute will join us next, right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I thought we were going to have a situation where we were going to be attacked. They were getting ready to attack Israel. They were getting ready to attack others. You're seeing that right now. And a lot of those missiles that are hitting in, those are stationary. Those were aimed there for a long period of time at these other countries. So I think I was right about that. We attacked first. And if we didn't, it could have been, look, we're really decimating them. They're being decimated. And if we didn't, and by the way, we have massive amounts of ammunition.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. And that was President Trump laying out his case for the preemptive strikes on Iran on what is now day 4 of this conflict. For more, we're joined now by Ken Pollack. He is Vice President for Policy at the Middle East Institute. Ken, thank you for being here on Bloomberg. You, of course, back in 2003 and before that even, were an advocate for a military invasion of Iraq. You did not, though, hold that same view at the time around Iran. You wrote a book, The Persian Puzzle, that essentially said diplomacy was needed in dealing with Iran, though you did need the threat of force. You thought that wasn't necessarily the best option when it came to the regime. Arguably, Ken, that regime is now decapitated. There is a very real question about what comes next. So how would you be advising this administration as we move forward, knowing they chose the military, not diplomatic option?
Right. Well, we are where we are, Kaylee. And, look, let's be very clear. This is an odious regime. The Iranian people will be better off without it. The Middle East will be better off without it. The United States will be better off without it. The world will be better off without it. And I'd like nothing better than to see it replaced by a democratic regime that reflected the people, something like what we saw in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union. But we need to recognize a few things. First, replacing a regime, overturning a regime purely by air power has proven exceptionally difficult over the years. People have been trying it for 80, 85 years. It really hasn't ever worked with just air power. Even a case like Libya in 2011, when NATO, including the United States, helped overturn the Gaddafi regime, we had a very important ground component in thousands, tens of thousands of Libyans, including many former Libyan military personnel who were protesting against the regime, taking up arms against the regime. That fixes the regime's military assets, puts them out there, makes them vulnerable to air power. What we're doing now, there's no ground component. The president has told the Iranian people to stay home, wait to ride this thing out. When it's done, at some point, if he calls them out into the streets, that will be different. But then we would have to provide that degree of air support to them. And that's going to be a very involved operation. So far, we've not seen any sign that the administration is interested in doing that. In addition, as you pointed out, Kelly, there's a very big question mark around what comes next. And Iraq, despite all of the incredible mistakes we made there, because we did have a force on the ground, because we did occupy the country, that gave us a tremendous influence over what happened. And eventually, during the surge, we were able to turn things around very, very significantly. There's no sign that the United States is going to make this similar kind of effort in Iran. I wouldn't necessarily be advising the administration to do that, but we need to recognize that without it, our ability to determine what happens in Iran after this is over is exceptionally limited. And in fact, I think that the president's statement that we could get someone who's just as bad, if not worse, than what we had beforehand, I think that's a really important recognition on his part of how little control we'll have.
Well, enter the Kurds, Ken. Axios is reporting that President Trump spoke by phone with Kurdish leaders in Iraq on Sunday. And CNN is now reporting that the CIA is making efforts to arm them. Will Kurdish forces be the boots on the ground that the U.S. is considered to be open to?
Certainly that's a possibility, Joe, and I'm really glad that you're raising it because, again, it gets into another set of scenarios for what the day after could look like. If we really overachieve and we're able to pull down this regime, and again, that is proven historically hard, but it's not impossible. And if we were to do it, another scenario would be that we get chaos, we get civil war. We should remember Iran is only about 60% Persian. There are very significant Kurdish populations up in the northwest, as you're saying, Arabs in the southwest, Baluch in the east, Azeris in the north. Many of these groups really don't want to be part of Iran, not of a Persian Iran. They might try to pull away from it. This is more or less what happened in Iran after World War I. You saw all of these different ethnic groups try to pull away. You saw fighting in the center. There was a massive civil war, and it took a man, almost literally a man on horseback, Reza Pahlavi, the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty, who was a military officer in Iran's Cossack brigade, and he eventually won that civil war and put Iran back together, but only after a number of years of very hard fighting, 3 to 5 years of really hard, nasty fighting. This time around, we could have the same or worse.
Ken, we just have a minute left here, but the president is suggesting the U.S. Navy will provide escorts to vessels and tankers that need to travel the Strait of Hormuz. Does that just make the U.S. military a more active target, not just for Iran, but its proxies?
Well, we should always remember the U.S. military is extraordinarily powerful. A U.S. Navy destroyer going into an area, technically they're a target, but they're also a force to be reckoned with. I'll say that I have no doubt that the Navy would really like to see that them and the Air Force tear up Iran's anti-ship missile facilities along the coast. But if the president orders them in, I have no doubt that they will go in. And again, yes, the Strait of Hormuz is tight, and there are a lot of Iranian missiles and military assets, but they're good at defending themselves.
Ken, it's great to have you here. Ken Pollack, Vice President for Policy at the Middle East Institute. We thank you for weighing in. And coming up, we're going to continue this conversation live from Capitol Hill with Senator Mike Rounds up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. We turn back now to the escalating conflict in the Middle East with ongoing strikes from the U.S. and Israel, triggering retaliatory attacks from Iran. On Capitol Hill, both chambers of Congress are preparing to vote this week on war powers resolutions that would require congressional authorization before President Trump can launch any further military action against Iran. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries made his case for passage earlier today.
Describing it as a war. So-called Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is describing it as a war. Other members of the administration are describing it as a war. and there's a requirement under the Constitution that it's members of Congress who make the decision as to whether to get us entangled in this kind of armed conflict. And that's what the resolution this week will be all about.
Joining us now with his take from Capitol Hill is Republican Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota. He serves on both the Senate Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. Senator, thank you so much for being with us here on Bloomberg. I'm curious where you draw the line as to at what point the president would need to come to Congress and ask for authorization, knowing he has not ruled out putting boots on the ground. Would he need to ask you first?
Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to visit. I think this is the debate that we will have over the next couple of days, but let me share with you my thoughts. First of all, the president, as the commander-in-chief under Article 2, does have the authority, we believe, to engage troops. We don't think there's any question about that. The second part is if you are actually going to have a declared war, then Congress has to do that. In the middle ground, we have the War Powers Act, which says that, and this has been an agreement that the presidents have done, and President Trump has agreed to do so as well. And that is he notified Congress within 48 hours of the possibility of hostilities or the anticipation of hostilities. And second of all, he notified us last night of the hostilities themselves, both well within the time frames that are required by the law. Next of all, he does have the ability during this next 60-day to 90-day period, without question in my mind, the ability to respond and to carry out the attacks that are currently going on in the Middle East. And the reason for that is based upon the timing. If you would like me to, I can go on, or if you want me to, or go ahead.
Well, I'm just hoping, when you consider the attacks, are you speaking specifically of aerial attacks, or would you say within this 60 to 90-day window that could also include ground forces if he decides it's necessary?
It could, based upon all of the conversations we've had. That is not part of the anticipated program, but there is no reason why any president would ever rule out or limit themselves from what they believe they may have to do to carry out the mission. So, yeah, we don't see that need right now, but the president still retains that right to utilize those boots on the ground if they feel necessary to accomplish the mission. At this point, based on what the mission is, that's not anticipated.
Senator, I'd like to ask you about the president's post a short time ago, an offer for political risk insurance and guarantees, including the potential for military escorts for tankers moving through the Strait of Hormuz. It has obviously brought up the prospect of additional risk for our naval aviators if, in fact, that is what we're going to be providing. If Houthi rebels start lobbing missiles at them again, is it worth that risk to move the oil?
Well, yeah, let me first of all clarify. The Houthis basically aren't near Hormuz, where we're talking about. That's closer to the Iranian coast. There's about a 20-mile stretch there, about 2 to 3 miles in the middle of it, which most of the tankers actually come through, coming down out of the Persian Gulf and out. A significant amount of our oil tankers follow through that route. The Iranians have made it clear that they're going to consider attacking, if they can, some of the vessels in that region, and they've indicated that, I think the Russians and the Chinese vessels would be allowed, and the rest of them they would be doing battle with. But we've done our best to, number one, take out the vast majority of their naval operations already, and we've also recognized that they might try to mine that area, and we've taken out a lot of their ability to do that. But the fact that it's being threatened means that some of those commercial operators are saying maybe we'll just wait and see for a little bit. So I think part of what might be being offered here is an assurance that if they do decide to do that there are alternatives there to mitigate some of any financial risks that might go there until such time as there is more confidence that the Iranians' capabilities for actually causing problems in that area might be taken care of.
Understood. I'd like to ask you about funding as well while you're here, and I don't know if this came up with any other members of your committee, Senator, but Lindsey Graham mentioned to reporters earlier that we may well need a supplemental. In fact, he said he believes there will be one to approve for the remainder of this operation, knowing, of course, that we're looking at the biggest defense budget, I believe, in American history right now. Do you also think that will be required, and would you support it?
I don't know if it'll be required or not. We do know that we've still got munitions available to us, but anytime you expend the munitions, you want to make sure that you're in a position to replace those munitions as quickly as possible. And so if, in the middle of this process over the next several weeks, they decide that they're going to ask for a supplemental, I most certainly would consider it, or as a part of the appropriations process. I think the president's indicated he'd like to go up about $500 billion in additional expenditures for the next coming year, some of which would probably be carried forward into future years. And that may very well be a part of the discussion moving forward within the Appropriations Committee. So a supplemental, naturally you'd have to have approval. It takes 60 votes in the Senate to get that and a majority in the House. But if not, we can work our way back through the regular appropriations process as well.
What about reconciliation as an option, Senator?
A possibility. Once again, if you do a reconciliation bill, you can look also at additional funding there. We haven't talked a lot about reconciliation recently. We have said, look, once we put together a package, whether, with regard to tax policy and so forth, if there is the need to do so, that's still on the table. But once again, you've got to do it in such a fashion that it is budget related. So you can spend money in a reconciliation bill, but you've also got to pay for that as well.
Senator, the president said today that he believed Iran was about to attack the United States. Have you seen evidence to support that? Do you believe that imminent risk was there?
There was a couple of things there. First of all, based upon the information that we've received so far, it was very clear that they were, number one, not dealing in good faith with us on the diplomatic side. We know that. And they were delaying. And in the meantime, they were building short-range and intermediate-range ballistic missiles. And they were getting to the point because they were manufacturing them faster than what we could manufacture our defensive capabilities. And at some stage, in the very near future, they would have been able to basically say, well, we're done with the nuclear negotiations, we're just going to do it. But oh, by the way, with our ballistic missile capabilities, nobody's going to dare challenge us because we can wreak real havoc in the region. And we were getting close to that point. In the meantime, this was a time in which we'd already taken out a lot of their defensive capabilities earlier. And this provided us with a little bit more of a time-sensitive time period in which if we were going to actually handle the situation before they got to the point where we could not handle it, it was a very limited window.
Well, Senator, we appreciate your take on all of this, given your position on the Intelligence and Armed Services Committees. But you also have a seat on the Banking Committee, and I wonder how you view where the geopolitics and economics intersect here. Are you willing to rule out that we could be faced with another potential inflationary supply shock due to what's happening in the Middle East?
Interesting. I think a lot of us have been looking at gas prices and so forth. We haven't seen a significant spike in fuel prices, and normally that takes several weeks before it starts to kick in. This mission, this program, this plan right now is not a long-term plan that the administration has, and it may very well be completed before those inputs, those reductions in oil coming out of the Middle East are actually seen within the supply chains. We know that China has a reserve supply already. In the United States, we have had increased production capacity here. So if we get this mission done in the next couple of weeks, as the president has indicated it's his goal, then we probably won't see a spike with regard to fuel prices, or at least not a significant one. In the meantime, and looking at what the markets are doing, it appears as though the markets have been pretty stable. Treasuries, which normally you would have seen start to kind of come down a little bit, they haven't really shown a drop in treasuries. They've been actually, fairly consistent, maybe up a little tiny bit. So at this point, no reason to show great cause and concern, but most certainly we'll continue to watch it carefully.
Senator, we appreciate your being so generous with your time. That's Republican Mike Rounds of South Dakota, live from Capitol Hill. Thank you, sir. The midterm primary season begins today, with voting underway right now in Texas and North Carolina, each state featuring contests that could determine whether Democrats have a shot at narrowing the gap with Republicans in the U.S. Senate. In Texas specifically, a three-way race including incumbent Senator John Cornyn, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, and Congressman Wesley Hunt, likely headed for a runoff election in May. Joining us now with the details, Bloomberg's Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine, who joins us live from our Dallas bureau. 40 minutes into the program, we're just first mentioning this. Julie, we're trying to tell you a lot about the news cycle that we're in right now. Give us a sense of why this is going to be likely headed to a runoff and why no presidential endorsement.
Well, we don't know why there wasn't a presidential endorsement at this point, but I can tell you this, all three Republican candidates truly wanted one. So at this point, you've got John Cornyn, who is the incumbent, running against Ken Paxton, who's the Attorney General, and Representative Wesley Hunt also in the race. Likely, Joe, you and I have discussed this. This is going to go to a runoff. It'd be very surprising if somebody won this outright. But again, everybody was hoping that they could get President Trump's endorsement in this race. President Trump saying, oh, I like all three of them, which didn't really benefit any of the candidates, as we can see at this point.
Well, so when we consider the candidates on the Republican side who have all been trying to win the favor of the president, Julie, talk to us about how each of them might fare against whoever wins on the Democratic side. If it's James Tallarico or if it's Jasmine Crockett, how does the calculus change depending on what the actual general election outcome is going to be here?
Well, Democrats are hoping that this is the first time they win statewide office since the 1990s. If it is Ken Paxton, Democrats feel he is extremely beatable. That is obviously who they want to run against. Republicans are hoping that they run against Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine Crockett is known as somewhat of a firebrand. James Tallarico tends to be more of a centrist. So that will really depend on who has that race. But I can tell you that Democrats would like to run against Ken Paxton, and Republicans I've spoken to say they hope that Jasmine Crockett's on the ticket.
All right, Bloomberg's Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine covering the primary for us, and she will continue to do so all night long here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much. And still ahead, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is in the hot seat on Capitol Hill today. We'll bring you the details from her testimony and discuss with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We'll get back to the latest in Iran when we assemble our political panel in just a moment. But first, another major story we're following today in Washington. As the Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem testifies on Capitol Hill for the first time since the deadly ICE shootings in Minneapolis, facing intense scrutiny by the Senate Judiciary Committee over her handling of ICE, delayed disaster response by FEMA, and even her dog, whom she famously shot. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina took particular aim at Noem's perceived failures as the head of DHS and even threatened to block Senate business till he gets answers from her regarding the FEMA response to his state earlier this year. Listen.
What we've seen is a disaster. Under your leadership, Ms. Noem, I'm giving you a performance evaluation here. I'm not looking for a response. And I'm saying, Ms. Noem, that time after time after time I've been disappointed. I believe the president recognized that you weren't getting it done in Minneapolis. The fact that you can't admit to a mistake, which looks like under investigation, is going to prove that Ms. Good and Mr. Petty probably should not have been shot in the face and in the back. Law enforcement needs to learn from that. You don't protect them by not looking after the facts. We expect exceptional leadership. And you've demonstrated anything but that. If I don't get an answer to these questions, if I don't get an answer that you've had a month to respond to, and the remaining ones, as of today, I'll be informing leadership that I'm putting a hold on any en bloc nominations until I get a response.
Secretary Noem will sit before the House Judiciary Committee tomorrow. And also tomorrow, the Senate is expected to vote on a war powers resolution to rein in the U.S.'s combat operations in Iran, which will likely fail, as Senate Majority Leader John Thune says President Trump was acting within his authority when taking this action.
I think the president has the authority that he needs to conduct the activities, the operations that are currently underway there. And as you know, there's a lot of controversy around, questions around the War Powers Act, but I think the president is acting in the best interest of the nation and our national security interests.
Joining us now with their reaction, this evening's political panel, Megan Hayes is with us, Democratic strategist, former special assistant to President Biden, alongside Republican strategist Maura Gillespie, founder and principal at Blue Stack Strategies. Ladies, it's great to have you both. Megan, I'll start with you on the Democratic drive to get this war powers vote on the floor. It does appear it's going to fail. Is this still worth the effort, getting Republicans and Democrats on the record here?
Yeah, absolutely, because what he's doing is not constitutional. He's taking the country into war without Congress, and that's what he needs to do. So I absolutely think they should be getting it on the record, because if this ends up being one of the never-ending wars and we're into the 28 or even 32 presidential elections, these votes, just like Iraq did, are going to come back to haunt these people.
Well, and the president did say on True Social that the U.S. has the munitions to carry this on, quote unquote, forever. Maura, is this actually something the Republican electorate that the Republican members of Congress represent want to see?
Well, it's certainly not what the MAGA world has purported to want. You know, they voted for Donald Trump because he promised not to engage in new wars. I think Republicans at large are not, going to shed a tear over the Ayatollah and their deaths, and they're certainly going to be looking at what is best for the country and where is safety being prioritized. I think there are a lot of questions still without answers about the why behind Donald Trump's decision to order those strikes on Saturday morning. And there should be some, real hard-hitting questions to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, about those operations as well, because the answers we've gotten from the White House are not sufficient, and they're severely lacking. And so for voters, they're going to want members to push on those things and to get the quality answers that we deserve, because the need for transparency seems to be a massive problem for the Trump administration.
Well, as primary voting gets underway today, of all days here, the timing is important. There are big questions about the extent to which this becomes a major campaign issue. Hakeem Jeffries thinks he knows. Here's the Democratic leader in the House.
On the campaign trail, Donald Trump and Republicans promised not to get the American people into endless, failed, foreign, forever wars. And yet Donald Trump has just gotten America into an endless war that he acknowledges and plans to be endless, as was the case earlier today.
And so, Megan, how should Democrats be messaging this on the campaign trail, knowing that President Trump was elected for a couple of issues, immigration, the economy, both of which I think you want to talk about, but also no new wars?
Yeah, I think that on Saturday morning, most Americans woke up and wondered why we were bombing another country that there was not an imminent threat against the United States when they can't afford groceries. And they're going to see their gas prices now skyrocket. There's predictions it's going to be over $4 a gallon again. That's not what people voted for Donald Trump for, and that's not what Americans want. And I think the Democrats already have really good footing going into the midterms based on the economy and based on some of Trump's failed economic policies like tariffs and health care subsidies failing. So I just think that Democrats need to stick to talking about the economy, and they need to stick to talking about how Donald Trump and the Republicans are not doing anything to help their daily lives.
Well, when we consider the question of affordability, and obviously one of the most visible measures of costs in the U.S., at least to the everyday American, is when they see the price at the pump and they're driving by the gas station. And perhaps, Maura, that's what the president is trying to address when he says we'll now provide insurance for vessels that need to transit the Strait of Hormuz, even U.S. Navy escorts for these vessels. If the cost of making sure that gas prices don't get too high is actually endangering U.S. service members, or perhaps, God forbid, even more American casualties, is that going to have the effect the president wants in terms of turning public sentiment more in support of his efforts?
I think with his base, perhaps it does. But I think for the large majority of the country, they're looking at this and wondering, why wasn't this thought of beforehand? Marco Rubio's State Department puts out a notice to countries and to Americans abroad on Monday at 5 o'clock saying, you should evacuate when the strikes happen on Saturday morning. I think there's a serious lack of severity that's being taken by the Trump administration from both the rollout of the announcement where the president's at Mar-a-Lago wearing a baseball cap, telling us in a pre-recorded video, and then staying in his Florida resort because he's attending a party that night, as opposed to coming back to D.C. We heard radio silence from the administration all weekend, and I think that as Republicans in Congress are looking at how this impacts them and their constituents, they really do need to be demanding more from the administration in terms of what is the goal, what was the why, and to take this more seriously, because what we've seen this weekend did not reflect that, and it could be really damaging to the Republican Party generally, but also to us as a country and to our allies around the world. We are jeopardizing a lot here, and we need to know what it's for.
We'd love to hear from you both on what we're about to see happen in Texas this evening. Megan, you've run campaigns in Texas and you're a Democrat. Is the conventional wisdom correct that James Talarico is a more effective statewide candidate than Jasmine Crockett?
You know, I think it'll be interesting to see who the turnout is, but I think the really interesting thing to note here is some of the early vote numbers have come back, and Democrats are outperforming the 2022 election by 131%, where Republicans are only at 61 or 62%, and over 250,000 more people have voted in the Democratic primary and early vote than they did in the general election in 2022. So that is like a staggering wake-up call for Republicans all over the country, that in a state like Texas that everyone does not think is purple and thinks is really red, has a chance to vote someone, whether it be the Congresswoman or James Talarico, to be a senator from the Democratic senator from the state of Texas. That should be sending a wake-up call that folks are not happy with the policies and the economic policies that the Republican Party is endorsing.
Well, the Republican Party, or at least the NRSC and other affiliations, are spending a lot of money on this primary. Maura, it's probably the most expensive Republican primary, Senate primary in history. And if this goes to a runoff, they're going to have to spend even more to try to protect John Cornyn. Is it time President Trump weighs in with his opinion on this race here?
I mean, I personally don't want him to, because I'm worried that he would go for Ken Paxton. And I think that John Cornyn is a better representative of a Republican Party that we need to be gearing towards. I think that Wesley Hunt's participation in this primary is adding to the cost in an unnecessary fashion. But just frankly, on how much we spend on campaigns is pretty egregious when you think about the cost of living. And we're talking about affordability in this country and the issues that we're facing. You mentioned gas prices. Here in New Jersey, I drove by the Wawa and it went up 17 cents over the weekend, just from Saturday to yesterday. So it's pretty stark. And I think there's something to be said about how much we spend on campaigns, and not even just campaigns, on primaries alone.
Well, with that said, when we wake up on Wednesday morning and consider a Republican runoff, apparently is where this is all headed. How do you move through the cycle knowing that this won't be decided until May as a Democrat?
I mean, I think the Democratic candidate just needs to keep moving through on their message, right? That was very effective in the primary, and it turns out votes. And also, we know it's costing, as Maura was saying, costing the Republican Party a lot of money, and that's taking money from the Republican Party out of other states that are going to be much more competitive, like Maine, like Alaska, where Democrats could pick up. So Republicans have, again, a big wake-up call that they need to realize they are not standing on sound footing in the House nor the Senate anymore.
All right, Megan Hayes and Maura Gillespie, our political panel this evening, thank you so much. And for the outcome of the primary vote and more on the Iran war that is still ongoing, check out the Washington edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
There's a partial government shutdown still ongoing.
Yeah, we keep
no one's talking
that.
about it. We'll get to this tomorrow on Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.